It's Monday, it's the 30th of June, and you're watching ARIRANG Korea's only global network. Live from Seoul, I'm Moon. Pyongyang has proposed that the two Koreas halt all cross-border slandering and military provocations starting at midnight on July 4th. In a so-called special proposal issued by the National Defense Commission Monday, Pyongyang said that the two Koreas should put a full stop to military activities, including an upcoming annual joint military drills between Seoul and Washington. Now, the statement said the South should cancel the Ulji Freedom Guardian exercises that began in August to create an amicable atmosphere before North Korea takes part in the Incheon Asian Games in September. Experts say the proposal could be seen as an attempt by Pyongyang to demonstrate its efforts to maintain peace on the Korean Peninsula ahead of Chinese President Xi Jinping's visit to Seoul this week. Meanwhile, North Korea is reportedly preparing to put two Americans on trial for carrying out what it says were hostile acts against that regime. Pyongyang's official Korean Central News Agency said in a short report today that investigations into Americans Matthew Todd Miller and Jeffrey Edward Fowles showed that suspicions about their crimes, although unspecified, have been confirmed by evidence and their testimony. Now, Miller and Fowle entered the North on separate tours in April. There are 3 U.S. citizens known to be detained in the North, including Kenneth Bae, a Korean American who has been held in the communist state for more than a year. Meanwhile, moving on to the National Assembly here, the Parliamentary Foreign Affairs Committee has passed a resolution condemning Japan's recent review of its past apology for coercing women into sexual slavery during World War II. Now, calling Tokyo's review of the 1993 Kono Statement a historical provocation, Korean lawmakers accused Japan of contradicting itself by denying the essence of its past apology and denounced it for damaging a peaceful coexistence and cooperation in Northeast Asia. Well, warning such a provocative act would isolate Japan from the international community. The resolution urges Tokyo to stop claiming the apology was a compromise made between Korea and Japan. Lawmakers also called on the Korean government to search for additional evidence of the Japanese military's forced wartime sexual enslavement of women from Korea and other countries in Asia. Chinese President Xi Jinping has vowed that no violations of territorial integrity will be tolerated and says no nation should be allowed to monopolize global affairs. Watchers say his comments can be seen as a thinly unveiled or veiled attack on the U.S. Kim Min-ji reports.
Chinese President Xi Jinping has stressed that the sovereignty and territorial integrity of a nation should be respected. His comments came during an event marking the 60th anniversary of a mutual peace agreement between China, Myanmar, and India. The 1954 agreement called for mutually respecting sovereignty and territorial integrity, as well as mutual non-aggression and non-interference in domestic affairs.
Sovereignty and territorial integrity should not be infringed upon. This is a basic principle that should not be ignored.
The comments come as China is locked in territorial disputes with neighboring countries such as Japan, the Philippines, and Vietnam. In a national meeting late last week, the leader said China should not forget its humiliating past as a victim of foreign aggression and called for stronger border defense. It was seen to target Tokyo in particular, which has been at odds with Beijing over territorial as well as historical disputes. He also stressed that China will not seek hegemony, no matter how strong it becomes.
China does not acknowledge the notion that a country will seek hegemony when it grows in strength. Hegemony or militarism is not the genes of China.
The Chinese leader also said the right of a country to choose its own social system and path of development should be respected. That remark was seemingly his way of telling the West to keep out of China's domestic affairs. The Chinese president, however, did not mention North Korea's nuclear weapons or the Korean Peninsula during his speech. Kim Min-ji, ARIRANG News.
President Park Geun-hye last week pledged to name a new presidential secretary to oversee personnel management, says her office will maintain a pool of talented candidates at all times and keep track of their verification records. At the first meeting of her senior secretary since retaining her prime minister following 2 nomination failures, President Park also asked the political parties to seek ways to improve the confirmation hearing process. As for a recent shooting spree at a general outpost near the inter-Korean border, the president said she was sorry that the incident happened, then asked the military to determine what exactly caused the incident, who should take responsibility, and to come up with preventive measures. A formal investigation into the Seoul ferry disaster is currently underway in Seoul's National Assembly. The parliamentary committee overseeing the probe began a special session at 10 this morning, that's roughly 6 hours ago, and is currently questioning various ministries on whether they have done enough in dealing with the ferry disaster. The ministries, including the Security Ministry and the Defense Ministry, have turned in reports on how they responded to the deadly disaster, and the probe is set to continue until Wednesday. So President Park Geun-hye is facing the most serious test of her leadership thus far, with her approval rating plunging after her administration's poor handling of the ferry disaster back in April and her failure to find a suitable prime minister. Well, this has many wondering whether she has enough time to push through with her envisioned reform drive and help the ruling party improve its chances in some critical by-elections at the end of July. Our correspondent Kim Young-gil reports.
President Park is racing against time to win back support from voters before a by-election on July 30th, with many political pundits saying her party has a good chance of losing its majority in parliament. An outcome like that would cripple her efforts to push through legislation aimed at spurring economic recovery, overhauling government systems, and stamping out social ills accumulated during a rapid, headlong drive toward industrialization over the past several decades. President Park's plan was to give a fresh impetus to her reform drive by shaking up her cabinet, but she ran into problems after her 2 prime minister nominees resigned one after another in the face of public criticism over morality and controversial remarks on history. The president's approval rating stood near 60% in March, but as of the end of June, the number is hovering around 48%, the lowest since she took office in 2013. The Park administration has been making reforms, but has made little progress. Since the Seoul ferry disaster, President Park has tried to overhaul the government's safety management system by dismantling the Korea Coast Guard and setting up a new safety management bureau directly under the Prime Minister's office. As part of efforts to end the cozy ties between the public and private sector, she also tried to keep retired government officials from landing jobs in companies, which has contributed to sloppy safety checks. Critics have also advised President Park to communicate more with the ruling Saenuri Party and the main opposition New Politics Alliance for Democracy. But with confirmation hearings for new cabinet members taking place at the National Assembly through next week and July's by-elections just around the corner, the president may have to come up with new tactics to regain the people's trust. Kim Young-gil, ARIRANG News.
Korea is set to eliminate or lower the tariffs on European cars, a move that is sure to help European automakers expand their market presence here while ramping up the competition for local car makers. Now, starting Tuesday, as Korea enters the 4th year of its free trade agreement with the EU, a 1.6% tariff levied on imported cars with an engine of 1.5 liters or larger will be removed, and a 4% tariff on cars with smaller engines will be lowered to 2.6%. Now, industry watchers predict that the move will give European cars an extra edge over other imported autos, as prices are expected to go down by $500 to $800. Few manufacturers here in Korea seem confident after the deadly ferry disaster in April dented already sluggish consumer spending. The Bank of Korea says the business sentiment index for June remained subdued, coming in at 77, which is down from the 79 tallied a month ago. That marks the second straight month of decline since the ferry's sinking a reading below the benchmark 100 means pessimists outnumber optimists. The central bank says sluggish domestic demand, a strong local currency, and a slowdown in emerging economies led the drop. But things look quite different for Korea's job market. Well, it seems to be faring pretty well. Job creation is expected to top 500,000 this year, marking the highest gain in 12 years. The Korea Development Institute says the nation will likely add between 400,000 to 480,000 new jobs in the second half of the year. Now, although the figure is a sharp decline from a year-on-year job growth of over 600,000 in the first half of this year, the job growth for the entire year is forecast to exceed the government's target of 450,000. Well, it's also expected to be the largest jump since 2002, when just another 600,000 jobs were created.
When the latest news meets the latest business stories, we give you a bigger and better picture of the world. Business Today with Moon Gon-young. Every weekday, only on ARIRANG.
It's an era of trust and peace on the Korean Peninsula. Speaking at the annual Well, smokers have it pretty good here in Korea. Cigarette prices are the lowest among OECD countries, and while there has been talk of raising tobacco prices for a pretty long time, they have remained the same for 10 years. But it seems like although enough is enough, as related ministries are making much more active efforts to make sure a price hike is pushed through. Our Kwon So-ah has this report.
Just last week, Korea's Ministry of Health and Welfare released a shocking anti-smoking advertisement in the hope it would convince smokers to kick their habit. At a recent symposium held on World No Tobacco Day, the ministry said it will actively push ahead with the World Health Organization's recommendation to raise cigarette prices to bring down the country's high smoking rate. In Korea, you pay 2,500 won, or roughly $2.50 for a pack of 20 cigarettes. That's the cheapest out of the 41 OECD nations. A pack of cigarettes is more than 6 times more expensive in Norway than it is in Korea. Medical experts say the relation between the price of tobacco and quitting cannot be ignored. In fact, 10 years ago, when the price of cigarettes went up by around 50 cents, the smoking rate among men in Korea dropped from 58% in 2004 to 44% just 2 years later. But there's a reason why the government has failed on a number of occasions to push through with a raise. There are concerns people in the low-income bracket will be hit hardest, since a cigarette price hike also means a tax hike. The tax paid on tobacco products is the same for high or low-income people. Tobacco tax is also paid indirectly, meaning the tax is not collected by the government, but by tobacco companies. But as Finance Minister nominee Choi Kyung-hwan has said, although there is a perception welfare is placing a higher tax burden on the people, cigarette prices must be raised for the sake of public health. Last year, Korea's smoking rate was the second highest among OECD members, barely trailing Greece. Kwon So-ah, ARIRANG News.
Well, the nation's leading mobile messaging service, KakaoTalk, has risen to third place in brand value, backed by a market share of over 90% in the sector. KakaoTalk garnered over 915 points out of 1,000 in the second quarter on market researcher Brandstock's top index, putting it in third among the hundreds branded surveys. Now, Samsung Galaxy smartphone topped the list for the fourth year in a row, followed by discount chain E-Mart, which has come second for the last 2 years. KakaoTalk's brand competitiveness is expected to strengthen even further after a merger with Daum Communications, the nation's second-largest internet portal. Korea's leading construction company, Hyundai Engineering and Construction, won its third contract in Venezuela on this Monday. The company says it has sealed a $4.84 billion contract to expand a refinery for state-run oil company PDVSA in conjunction with affiliate Hyundai Engineering and China's Wison Engineering. Hyundai E&C owns the majority of that deal with a share of 73%. The order calls for an expansion and upgrade of existing refineries, and the facility is located about 250 kilometers from the capital, Caracas, and the project is expected to take roughly 4 years. Canada E&C entered Latin America back in 2010 and Venezuela just 2 years ago. Making sure that spent nuclear fuel is stored safely is crucial in using nuclear energy. But this part is becoming a problem for Korea as storage facilities are nearing their saturation point. And as our Polly explains, time is running out to find a solution.
When petroleum is burned, it releases carbon dioxide. But when coal briquettes are burned, you're left with ashes. Nuclear energy is similar to briquettes in this sense. When 100 kilograms of uranium is spent, the nuclear waste produced is almost equal in amount, and it comes with radioactivity and extreme heat. So the fuel is stored in a nearby cistern and cooled. The problem here in Korea is that some of these temporary facilities will be full to the brim in the next few years. These are the current levels at some plants. The Kori nuclear plant in Busan, the nation's oldest, stands at 70% capacity, Worsong at 75, Hanbit at 65, and Hanul at 62. Although the construction of new plants has given Korea some time to spare, experts say the deadline is 2024. Korea has a total of 23 nuclear plants and some 700 tons of spent fuel is produced each year. Without a solution in the next 10 years, the nuclear plants will have to be shut down and Korea will face a risk of a blackout. The construction of interim storage facilities is currently being considered as the most plausible solution.
As there is a master plan to permanently dispose of or reprocess spent fuel, I believe a time frame needs to be clarified for the construction of interim storage facilities.
Some 20 countries worldwide operate interim storage facilities. An independent committee was formed last year and is seeking advice and ideas from experts. They plan to decide on how to deal with the issue by the end of the year. Paul Yi, ARIRANG News.
Well, Chinese investors have poured in nearly $1.4 billion into the Korean stock market over the past 6 months, backed by ample liquidity and a relaxation of offshore investment regulations. In fact, the Chinese have become the largest foreign net buyers of Korean shares. So why the surge and what needs to be done to keep up the attraction? Dr. Kim Byung-ju, as always, joins me live in the studio. So, Dr. Kim, how big is this surge?
It's overall, the magnitude itself seems to be quite significant here. And we have prepared numbers. Let's bring it up so that our viewers can get to watch it. The starting point of this inflow was actually back in 2008. Starting from June that year, 2008. Chinese government designated Korea as a possible investment destination for Chinese money. And since then, money has been pouring in. And what you're seeing on the screen right here is almost like 3 times jump within 4 years' time, starting from 2009, reaching 2013. And as you can easily tell from the graphs here, this year it will easily exceed last year's 2.2 trillion won inflow. So overall, the amount itself is pretty big, quite big indeed, and the analysts seem to be in unison, in unity, in expecting actually this kind of flow will continue on in the long run. For sure.
Right. So, this year it would easily top, I think, maybe a 3 trillion won or $3 billion. Now, how does it compare with money flowing in from other parts of the globe?
Okay. Let's bring up next number that we have prepared to explain that. overall, as you mentioned, it is during the specific time period now. In terms of net buying itself, let's bring up the numbers here. In terms of net buying, China has become the largest, at least for this year, during the period of time January through May. Of course, European investors, United investors, they buy a lot, and then what happens is they sell a lot too. And Chinese investors, they seem to be holding these stocks once they buy these. That's why it makes China the largest net buyer of stocks. So don't be misled here. Western investors are pretty active here. And when I say active, I mean in both buying and selling. And from Korean perspective, what we need is this kind of big-time net buyers in order to keep the stock market up. So indeed, Chinese investors are being welcomed the way I see it with great enthusiasm here in Korea because of their tendency of this kind of net buying, even though their absolute amount may kind of vary and all that. The interesting thing is Chinese buying of Korean asset market was well known ahead of time of this stock buying behavior in the form of buying Korea's bonds. In terms of Korean bond market, they back in 2009, they purchased about 1.8 trillion won net worth. 2010, about 4.7 trillion. And then 2011, 3.7 trillion. We don't have a number for 2012 and 13 yet. But so this is not like what they're doing only in the stock market here. They've been doing this in the bond market
as well.
Yeah, overall, and asset market as a whole, because the real estate, they've been buying Jeju-do lands in Jeju Island big time as well. So it's overall what we see here is Chinese enthusiasm with regard to Korea's asset market as a whole.
Well, I suppose this is good news because we know that China is a booming market, and the Chinese investors who are wealthy are very wealthy, and they have a lot of money to spare in Korea. So what accounts for this surge from China?
There are several factors here. I've already mentioned the real estate market, especially Chinese buying behavior of lands in Jeju Island here. And what that explains is in China, their real estate market used to be a very hot market for investment of their money. But their real estate market is cooling off. So that's why we are seeing this money being moved towards Korea's real estate market in Jeju Island, where they can relatively freely buy these lands, and leftover is shown in the Korea's financial market as well. So cooling of Chinese real estate market is number one cause, and the other one is Chinese liberalization of their finance as a whole, allowing the outflow of capital here, and that has driven up overall outflow in total. But Korea is one of their top destination of their, the money. That's why we are seeing here. And overall, why is Chinese encouraging the outflow here? Because they are afraid of the further appreciation of Chinese yuan, because they don't want to see their current currency becoming any stronger than that. And then also they don't want to see inflation as well. So there is a reason for encouraging this kind of outflow. Plus, lastly, overall what's happening is diversification. So far, until up to this moment, Chinese investment was usually made in yuan assets at home and then dollar assets overseas. But they want to diversify. What's been happening is Hong Kong used to be a big place, but Hong Kong, the gap between the market difference between Hong Kong and the mainland has been narrowing. So they've been losing their merits there. And then other places like Switzerland, they've been losing their merits for other reasons that we don't want to spend too much on here as well. So that's why Korea is catching up in relation with other competition.
Well, would it be safe to say that Korea is all the more attractive to Chinese investors because of its familiarity with the country?
Right, indeed. Let's bring up next the pie chart that we have prepared here. And actually, I have mentioned that Korea is fast becoming one of Chinese favorite here. As you can see, Hong Kong used to be the favorite one. It's shrinking gradually. United States was the major one, but now Korea comes like right next to it, number 3 here. And what we're expecting, as I said, is Korea fast becoming bigger, number 3, and I don't know, one day maybe catching up with the United States. I don't know about that. But here in the screen here, what you have to pay attention to is the fact that we are ahead of Taiwan. That means a lot here. So they're saying that the relative importance of Korea will only continue to increase over time in the future.
And I suppose that's good news for the Korean stock market and the Korean economy as a whole.
Absolutely.
And we would really like to see more of Chinese investors they're buying up Korean stocks in the future.
Right, that's for sure.
All right, thank you so much for today, Dr. Kim Myung-ju.
Thank you.
And that's your business today on this Monday. Thank you for watching, and do join us again at 6 p.m. Korea time on Early Dish Net 6.